In this session, we're going to explore some ways to improve Joomla's governance. And I want to just make it clear from the outset that I don't have any zombie video clips in this presentation. And actually, there's Ronnie, I'm going to have to disappoint you. I don't even have one picture in this one. So, my name is Paul Orwig. I'm the president of Open Source Matters, which is the nonprofit organization that was founded to provide legal, financial, organizational support for the Joomla project. We have some other OSM board members here, Jacques Rinsky, Vice President, and Alice Revet, our Secretary. And thank you all for coming. What I want to go through today are to kind of look at 4 questions. The first one, what does governance mean specifically in the context of an open source project? And then why is good governance, in my view, especially important for a project like Joomla? And then third, how does Joomla's current governance work? And then the 4th question is, how can we improve Joomla's governance? And if this session goes the way I hope it will, then I'll just be talking for maybe half the time, and then the rest of the time I want to hear your ideas, questions, thoughts, suggestions about what we can do to improve Joomla's governance, and then there'll be some next steps to follow up with after that I'll go into too. So for that first question, what does governance mean? To me, it means that it's, in the context of an open source project, it's a framework for helping to make decisions. It's a structure for helping to organize the work. It's a means to hopefully provide some effective and responsive interaction between different parts of the community so that everybody's in touch with each other. And it also provides some processes for addressing and resolving issues and conflicts and things like that. Second question, why is governance important for Joomla? To me, part of the answers are that there's some things that Joomla doesn't have that other open source projects do have, and those things that other open source projects do have simplify their governance in some respects. And one is we don't have a benevolent dictator, which is a common theme in some other open source projects. And one of the benefits of having a benevolent dictator, at least from a governance standpoint, is that person can provide some clear vision, some clear direction, a clear roadmap for the project, right? And then it's your choice as a user or a community member whether you want to accept that vision, accept that roadmap, and if you do, then you become more involved in the project, and if you don't, then that's okay. You're invited to find another project if you want to get involved with that. But at least from a governance standpoint, I think it really simplifies things, makes things easier if you've got a benevolent dictator. Well, Joomla doesn't have that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it just makes our governance a little more complicated, I think. And then the second component is that we don't, like some other open source projects, we don't have a primary business or corporate sponsor that contributes staff, developers, or financial resources as the primary source of support for the project. So really for us in Joomla, it really is up to us. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons why I really like being a member of the Joomla community. Is I think it's a fun challenge. Sometimes it's a difficult challenge. Sometimes it's a struggle. But I think the idea that we can figure it all out together, and we can have a say in being involved with a project with goals like Joomla has, is fun and intriguing and exciting and a good challenge. And so if we're going to be effective with that, then I think that more so with those other projects that have benevolent dictators for life or have real strong support from a single business to help drive development and support the infrastructure, that since Joomla doesn't have that, I think the key for us is that our project's future success depends on our ability to attract and retain a large and diverse group of skilled volunteer contributors. So that's our lifeblood. That's our most important thing. That's where it all starts and finishes. And so if you agree, if that's the case, then I think that the most important function for Joomla's governance is to create and support a culture that'll do that, that'll attract and retain a large and diverse group of skilled volunteer contributors that our project's success depends on. Other projects, it may not be as urgent for them if they've got a benevolent dictator that can drive the direction and the vision for the project. If they've got a business that can pour lots of developer resources, lots of money into the project, maybe they don't care so much about attracting and retaining that large and diverse group of skilled volunteer contributors. But Joomla doesn't have those luxuries, so I think it really becomes much more important for us to be sensitive and responsive to have the best governance that we can possible. And so the kind of culture that I think that means that we need to create and support to be able to attract and retain those kinds of skilled developers, or to really focus on making it inspiring, meaningful, open, responsive, respectful, and most of all, fun. So now the third question was, how does Joomla's governance work now? And so here's kind of a diagram of the current Joomla project's governance structure. Across the bottom, you'll see there's 3 leadership teams. We've got the production leadership team that is responsible for code development and releases and bug fixes, documentation, translations of all the different language strings into language packs, and they also manage some of the websites under Joomla.org. Then we've got a community leadership team that is responsible for the forums, directories, the Joomla Community Magazine, the JPeople site, the Joomla user groups, and some other websites. And then there's Open Source Matters, which manages the legal, financial, trademark communications from an external standpoint mostly. Events, the Joomla shop, and some other websites. And then you'll see above Open Source Matters, there's another box for the Community Oversight Committee. And that's a group that is responsible for the technical aspects of adding and removing Open Source Matters board members, but they don't manage any websites. And so because Open Source Matters is the legal owner of the Joomla trademark, so we've got bylaws and you know, we're subject to following those bylaws. That's why there's this extra bit that is only has oversight over Open Source Matters board. And the idea with that is that if the Open Source Matters board ever wanted to sell the rights to the Joomla trademark or other things like that, then that Community Oversight Committee is there to make sure that that doesn't happen. And if board members tried to do something that wasn't consistent with the philosophy of the project, then that Community Oversight Committee can add or remove board members. In practice, you know, there haven't been any issues or problems with that, and so Open Source Matters board members, current board members, take nominations from the community for new board members and then give recommendations to the Community Oversight Committee for who to add, and then that Community Oversight Committee typically just accepts those recommendations.
Small question, Paul.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you normally have bylaws doing all of those regulations?
Yeah.
Instead of the community oversight?
Well, so we've got bylaws that provide, and you know, part of the provisions of the bylaws is that Community Oversight Committee, you know, here's their duties and their roles. And so
I find it a
for the COC.
So for an organizational point of view, it's a strange element of it.
Well, the entire Joomla structure is strange.
Well, I think that part is perhaps a bit more strange because there's what's the exit strategies and what's the rules and regulations of the as such.
I won't disagree, and you know, I think we can talk about that a little bit more now, or we can save it for later. I mean, there's a question there.
Is open source matters a 503c or?
No, it used to be, right? It used to be, but we.
So it's a C or S corp or LLC or?
It's a, help me out, Ryan.
Yeah, it's not registered as a 501c3 through IRS, federal IRS statute. It's a nonprofit charity. It's a B filing
Okay.
for
So
state of New York.
it's just a nonprofit group then?
Yeah, registered in the state of New York.
And then what is the COC? Is that some kind, are they directors or what is that a separate organization?
Yeah, so it's a separate committee, and there's 5 people that are on it, and I think the bylaws say that it ranges between 3 and 7 or something. Don't the bylaws have a provision
Yeah,
for?
there's a minimum amount that's listed. It's historically they were Brian can help me there if I'm wrong. Historically they were formed from the core team. They were quite a big group, I think, at one stage.
Was it one person from all the teams on?
Not sure, but it was quite. The names are still mentioned there in the bylaws of the initial members of the COC. There's just a provision saying that the minimum amount that needs to be there. But basically, according to the statutes, they themselves elect them or remove the members of that. It's technically not a committee. It's not a committee of the board. It's a special structure that's created through the statutes of the organization.
So in some sense, it's not really a fourth organization. It's simply a box inside of the open source matters box that provides electing directors.
I'd say it. I mean, I'd agree with you about 95%. I think that box is outside of OSM because none of the people on the Community Oversight Committee are OSM board members, and they're sort of serving that oversight check and balance role. Let's say there's 5 members that are on there now. 3 of them are made up from people on the production leadership team or the community leadership team. There's 2 others who are on there who are former members of those leadership teams, but they're not members of them now. And that has some issues with it too, I think, in terms of is that a good way to define oversight if the members of that oversight group are also either members or former members of those other leadership teams. Some might say that's good, some might say it's not. But I think, yeah, so there's some questions and comments about how effective is this structure. Well, yeah, that's part of what the purpose for this session is, and part of the, I'll go through a little bit of history about some discussions and work that's gone into looking at potentially changing it and where that stands now. Any other questions or comments about the structure as it stands today?
So who selects who's on the COC?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not really sure I know the answer to it.
They themselves.
They themselves. All right, so there you go.
So the people providing oversight are responsible for the oversight of themselves?
Yes.
In a way,
It's got to start
Ryan?
somewhere, right?
So just 2 quick things. One from unless you're going to talk about historical, like how it got to this.
I was going to talk about like that San Jose summit
Oh, right.
last year and since then, but not really about the history of it, so that'd be good.
The super time snap on this is that the reason why the COC exists is we have to remember that Joomla started from essentially a power play of the Mongo project. So you've got these patriots that have left England and gone to this new land and said, we don't want the old way to happen ever again. So we trust each other. There's a group of 20 of us that we really trust each other, and so we're going to be the COC. And there's an grows into the concept of having a nonprofit. So COC is a legacy of that old way of thinking, and this is why Paul, I believe that with that being some of the movements were saying, well, this has changed. Maybe we need to rethink the structure. And even if the COC goes away, somebody's going to have to self-select themselves.
Thanks, Ryan. And one of the kind of underlying foundational concepts that I want to say a little bit more on from what Ryan shared is that, to me, there's a notion of life cycle in many things, and I think the growth and evolution of an organization like Joomla also has a life cycle. And this structure that's in place today, that Ryan gave that snapshot into, it's my feeling like that structure it served its purpose. It helped to bring Joomla to a point of growth and prominence. But my feeling, come on in, join us, is that Joomla has outgrown this structure. And if Joomla is going to continue to grow and develop and prosper and do better at achieving its potential, then we need to be willing to grow and change and take a look at other ways that we can just continue to follow down that life cycle. Mark?
Maybe something like a community member at large to represent the population of the community.
All right. I think
where the general public or the community could feel like they've got an ombudsman
Yep.
to speak their mind without having influence from the other parties involved, but still feel like they got a voice.
you bet. Hold that thought, and we'll come back to that thought and any others that you guys have as far as suggestions for what we might do to improve that structure in the future. An interesting observation that was shared with me a few weeks ago was it goes back to that life cycle idea, but that, in some ways this structure might be similar to, if you look back in history, back in the feudal days, where there were kings and lords and castles and fiefdoms and things like that, and that system worked for a long time, but eventually it gave way to other systems where the farmers and the general populace got to have more of a say in the governance of their lives and their countries and their worlds and stuff. And I think that in some ways Joomla is at sort of that crossroads point too, and that we can take a look at ways to improve that. So my opinion, there's some challenges that we have with our current governance are that we've historically been pretty good at setting individual leadership team level goals, but not project-wide goals. And we did, at a summit meeting we had at J and Beyond back in last May, we created a new working group that has a mission for setting project-wide goals. And we're committed to doing that for 2013. So we will get better in that with the existing structure, but that's still a forward-looking thing for the future and not something that we have shown success with yet. That overall project goals and survey that some of y'all may be familiar with is part of the output from that new working group. The second point is that each leadership team can have different rules and processes for how they add and remove their members and set term limits and things like that. And that was also addressed at the Leadership Summit at J and Beyond back in May, and we revisited that just 2 days ago on Thursday. And there should be an announcement, a blog post coming out soon to where we're starting to move closer to the same set of rules for all leadership teams, just to keep things simpler and consistent. So I believe we're going to get better with that. We don't always coordinate well between leadership teams, and there's really no process to address that. So we've got communications channels on email lists and Skype chats and things like that where we all talk together. But when issues, questions, problems come up that don't really fall cleanly within one group's responsibility or another's, there's really no official, universally agreed upon process on how we address and resolve those situations, and sometimes they don't always get addressed and resolved, and so that becomes a challenge. There's also, in some cases, legal issues that get complicated, and I'll give one example where the Joomla extension directory, every person, every organization that lists an extension on the JED accepts terms of service for the Joomla extension directory, because Open Source Matters is the arm of the project that is the legal, legal entity of the project. That agreement is between the extension lister and Open Source Matters, but the team that manages the functions of the Joomla extensions directory is the community leadership team. So we've got sort of a disconnect between who somebody's entering into an agreement with, but another group that may not always go along with the terms of that agreement, and there's not always ways to address and resolve issues in those kinds of cases. And then finally, there's opportunity in the current structure. There's opportunities, I think, to improve how oversight and accountability works. And I think in it's sort of a delicate matter, because we're all volunteers, and nobody wants to be a volunteer in an organization where they're feel like they are being forced to do something, they're being ordered to do something, they have things that are being dictated to them about what they have to do and how they have to do it. That goes back to that, the culture needs to be fun. But at the same time, I think when we're one of the largest free open source software projects in the world, and there's millions of websites and probably tens of thousands of families that are being supported by Joomla software and services around it, then I think there's a responsibility there for us to all be accountable to the community, and for there to be some sort of fair oversight that's in there, so that things are just managed in a appropriate way. I mentioned briefly earlier, before Ryan gave the comments about the history, that we had a summit in 2011 here in San Jose, and we met to, among other things, discuss some proposed leadership structure changes. And if you remember that previous diagram had the 3 boxes with the 1 box above it. The idea that came out of this summit meeting in 2011 was that we might change to a governance model that had a board of directors that essentially was responsible for setting overall goals and strategy for the project, and then also having oversight for essentially all the working groups within the project. And then we would kind of break up some of the functions within those 3 blocks that were in that original diagram into an undetermined number of committees, smaller working groups. I've got 9 there listed, but that was just, we never really defined how many of those committees there might be or what their different areas of responsibility would be. But this was the concept that came out of those summit meetings in 2011 on how we might change our leadership structure and our governance model to try to address some of those challenges that we have with the current structure. So after that meeting, which was, in July of 2011, I believe, we, a couple of months after that, published a blog about it, attached a public discussion to it that got a lot of attention, just asking for feedback about the proposal. had some challenges within the leadership team to sort of reach an agreement on a path forward, and so things kind of stalled out there. And that, again, goes back to that challenge that I mentioned earlier, one of those challenges earlier, where there's really no set process on how to address and resolve kind of overall project-wide inter-team leadership kind of questions and issues. So finally, we ended up deciding that we were going to form a working group, and it was made up of members from Open Source Matters, Community Leadership Team, Production Leadership Team was invited to join that working group, but they chose not to, just, I think, because they were working on other things. And we also brought in 3 members from the community outside of leadership to work on that. We only gave them 6 weeks. It was kind of a short notice idea that came up, but we knew we were going to have some follow-up meetings in May of this year at the J and Beyond conference, and we thought that forming a working group to study the issue and present some more specific recommendations might be a good way to try to kickstart that idea and get it moving forward again. So that group did their work, and at the joint leadership meetings in May in 2012, those recommendations were discussed. The decision was made to not implement those proposed structure changes, but instead to keep the current structure in place and to try to work on implementing some process improvements. And then we met again on Thursday all together between PLT, CLT, and OSM, and kind of came back and revisited what those agreements were, where we have moved forward and where we haven't. And I think again, I'm at least happy to say that there should be a blog fairly soon, within a week or so, I think, that'll give some more detail about what those process improvements consist of and how they're going to be implemented. So the last question of the 4 is, how can we improve Joomla's governance? It's my belief that we ought to set as high a goals as we can and as high standards as we can for improving the governance. It goes back to that idea that Pascal had last night with his keynote, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but or how he phrased it. But it was the idea towards the end where he talked about, have an excellent product, and if you don't really have a commitment to have the best, highest quality product you have, then what's the point? And to me, I really feel like that applies to us, and it doesn't just apply to the code that we share, but it applies to every area of our project. And the governance, to me, is right at the heart of that, and that the good governance won't write a single line of code, but what I believe it will do is help reduce drama, improve productivity, empower more people, open more opportunities for skilled, quality people to join in, to want to contribute, who might otherwise not feel that way. And so indirectly, I think making good governance a priority can improve the code in every other area of the project as well. So to me, I think it's important to set high goals and standards for improving the Joomla's governance, but also need to be practical and realistic and realize that change is hard and it takes time, especially in this kind of area. Part of the reason why I went through that sort of recent history and the ups and downs and the time it took and things stalling out and coming and kind of weaving back and forth is a recognition that these are some large-scale issues with people with different points of view on, and we just have to realize you can't just say, okay, this is the best path forward, snap your fingers and be done with it. Another aspect, I think, of how we can improve Joomla's governance is to look at other free open source projects and how they govern themselves and see what ideas they have that we might adopt that would fit our culture, fit our project, and try to learn from those other projects and other communities. And I think that we could also do better. We can improve our governance by finding more ways to improve the interaction between the leadership and the community. We did this overall project goal survey. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that, and you know, people liking the idea that we're asking questions and we're inviting feedback and input and ideas from the community. And I think we ought to do more of that. And I hope that we'll make an ongoing commitment to find new ways like surveys to interact better with the community. Have more consistent blogs and announcements. And another thing that came out of our leadership meetings on Thursday is to make better use of the public communications channels that we have. That can include things such as simplifying and consolidating where people go to find information about what's going on and what the plans are for what's coming up next. And also, we've got a set of email lists that are public, and we've got another set of email lists that aren't public, and there's so they're just private within the leadership team members. And there's good reasons for that. There's some matters that, you know, shouldn't be talked about in the open, but I think that over time we tend to, I don't know if getting lazy is the right way to put it, but it's safer, it's easier, it's less stressful if you're having a private conversation. You're opening yourselves up to less criticism, you know, second guessing, negative tweets, stuff like that if you have non-public discussions, right? And I think that at the same time, our leadership has a responsibility in a community-oriented project to be as public as we can with every discussion topic that is appropriate to have in public. And I think the nature of those discussions might change if there were more in public. So we talked about that on Thursday as well, to try to make a renewed commitment to having more discussions in public. The trick is always that it's easy enough to say this is what we're going to do, but actually following through on it is sometimes another challenge. Another way that we can improve Joomla's governance, I think, is to seek out and partner with universities and organizations and leaders that have expertise in this area. And we have, we've made a connection with a university in Germany that has been conducting surveys on free open source governance. They asked members of our leadership to participate in their research project. We did, and then we followed up with them to ask if they would be interested in kind of continuing to work with the Joomla project, maybe as a case study, and get to know us better and work with us on an ongoing basis to try to help give us some guidance in terms of what they think might be some best practices. And this, I'll go back to Pascal yesterday evening, who gave that closing keynote. Sandy Ordonez, our new OSM board member, has the idea of forming an advisory board that would just be subject matter experts in different areas that we could go to. They wouldn't be an official part of the structure, but just people that we could have relationships with and connections with and ask them for help and guidance in different areas. And Sandy got Pascal's email address. I think he'd be an example of a great guy that, if you know, could be a resource like that to someone who's been through some of the things that we're going through and maybe give us some help and guidance in that area. So to continue on with that fourth question on how can we improve Joomla's governance, what I proposed Thursday at our joint leadership meetings was that we establish a new standing Joomla working group. We've got a number of working groups that are kind of like focused on the code, on improving and working on different areas of the code, as well as other areas of the project. But I proposed, and nobody objected to, so I'm kind of announcing it here, that I would like to see us establish a standing permanent Joomla working group that's going to have a mission to look for and recommend ways to continually improve our project's governance. And I'd be thrilled if some or all of you all would be interested in joining that working group. Ideally, I'd like to see at least one representative from PLT, CLT, and OSM be a member of that working group, but I really would like, I mean, it has to be also include and be, in my mind, have a number of members from the community who have a passion and an interest and have a desire to try to improve Joomla's governance and establish some best practices for us. So, and it really kind of boils down to, at least for me, why this is important is it ties in with my dream for Joomla, which is for us to show what we can achieve when we've got a diverse group of passionate volunteer contributors from all over the world that are really fully empowered and connected for the purpose of continually innovating, supporting, and sharing our community-powered software. And I think, again, that the better governance we have, the closer we're going to have to be able to achieve that potential, and that's something that we could all be proud of. Okay, so that's really what I've got to share with this. If you're interested in being a part of this working group, come let me know now, but before you head back home on Sunday or Monday, or send me an email there and let me know. And I think the next step will be probably a blog post following up to announce the same thing and inviting others from the community to join that working group. Ronnie?
And the other working groups, they'll pass around a note for people to put their name and email on, because then you can call them right away.
That's a good idea. I'm going to do that now.
Accountability is a real issue that you're dealing with. Put together a working group of 10 or 15 people who are motivated about improving your governance, and they take the work and they make all these suggestions, but there's nothing that says about any of the other groups that any of those suggestions have any merit or have to be paid any attention to. How do you get around that?
You're right. Yeah, you've kind of cut to the core of it, or the part of the core of it. So here's just pass that around and put your email address on it if you're interested. So a great question, and yep, that's a challenge. And part of the if you read between the lines on the history of those proposed leadership structure changes and how we hadn't really gone as far with carrying through on those proposed changes is because change is hard, because everybody hasn't been willing to follow through on and really continue on with those proposed changes. And to me, part of it, and I wanted to be explicit about some of those challenges as I walk through this presentation, because there's no guarantee that the output from this working group that I'm proposing we start is going to have 100% success. And so I think that anybody who's interested in maybe joining that working group needs to understand that, and the best I can say is that nobody on the leadership team said, oh, this working group's a bad idea because I don't want to hear what they have to say. Nobody said that, but also nobody said, oh yes, we'll promise to accept whatever recommendations come out of this working group. I believe, just a sec, Mark, I think what I've learned over the last few years in leadership and trying to work for more leadership structure changes is I think that we've got to be patient, and we've got to not try to twist somebody's arm. But we've got to, if we look at things with the right perspective, and focus on the benefits and the solutions and the outcomes that we are hoping for, as opposed to this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is broken, then I think we have a better chance for success. And I also think that the more that we can get the community as a whole involved and interact with and have it be kind of a broader initiative that has broader support, and that I believe that overall leadership will be more responsive to changes in that respect. Mark?
Maybe like a facilitator role, who somebody or a few people from the community to kind of interact between all the groups as part of that working group for the governance. And they're the people from the general population, because some people feel like we're so big that my vote don't count.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of ideas off of that. That's a good point. We had to meet the leadership session earlier this morning, and James Foreman suggested, you know, there's user groups, and maybe there could be some sort of a way to have user groups around the world have a voice in some things and have a communications channel with them. One thing that I'd like to see this working group explore is that community oversight committee, and maybe changing from 5 people to, you know, a larger group that would be formed up from members of the community, and that those people would have some oversight and some responsibility that is currently fulfilled by the community oversight committee, at least to look at it and research it. Ronnie?
I think the idea of pulling in the jogs, all jogs are officially approved, and should by that we have an official role or a valid reason for being part of the process. So like Pascal said also in his keynote yesterday, was to treat the members as citizens, and I think that's a quite empowering part of that line. So having, instead of the COC, like a parliament of jog people doing it. And it could be to cover all parts. It could be like for each continent there would be a certain amount of JOG members or whatever, and then locally the JOGs could figure out who they wanted to send as a
local perspective of represented up to the higher up.
Exactly. So if in Denmark or in Scandinavia we decided to do like an annual meeting and pick a member to send, we could do like that, and other places they can do it. But in the end, they could be like 15 or 20 or whatever, X amount of judge members in an oversight. That would be really a democratic process.
So, you know, what I like about that is that, you know, there's already, like you said, approved structures that are in place there. There's some challenges too, like in where I live, there's really no active Joomla user groups. But
That needs to be addressed. I think that there needs to be something created for people who can't be part of it.
well, we can, so, you know, to me, here's the thing. You know, I talked about that working group that was formed with 6 weeks to come up with some recommendations. And they did their best and they did good, but it wasn't real. We asked too much of them in too short of an amount of time. And that's why I'm coming back now and saying, for people that have a passion for this, have ideas like this, let's not put a time limit on it, so that we can explore these questions and find answers to them in a thoughtful way, in a responsible way, in an effective way. And I think that's part of the reason why some of the changes haven't gone through, some of the previous changes haven't been accepted, is because there hasn't been enough details for people to say that they know for sure what exactly is they're voting to approve or not approve or whatever. And so that's why, as I see it, you know, part of the mandate for this working group would be that, you know, it's going to look for and recommend ways to continually improve our project governance. And so we don't have to say it's got to be done in 2 months or 3 months or something like that. We're just going to look for continual improvements just like we do for the software. Kendall?
Going to that point, I've belonged to an organization for a long time that did exactly that. They have independent chapters that can form anywhere around the world, but for those people that don't exist within an area where one exists, they have an independent chapter.
Okay.
They're able to actually, you can join that independent chapter, and then those chapters themselves at the annual meeting that they do every 2 years, well not annual, but the annual meeting that happens every 2 years at the convention, the chapters actually elect the board of directors.
Okay.
And that independent chapter actually has a vote as a chapter, and they are able to actually have a voice even if they're not in the user group. And so that's what they ended up doing, because they had all these people that weren't in big cities where these chapters were at.
So what we need, I think, for this working group is people that have got enough of an interest in these kinds of issues to be able to work through that kind of painful level of detail to answer those questions on how would it be organized, how many votes would there be, who would get a vote, how would that be qualified, you know, and be willing to do that work with also with the understanding that there's no guarantee that it's going to be carried out. And I guess in a sense, as I say that, I think that's kind of in some ways the same spirit with contributing code to the project. You kind of come up with a proposal, and maybe you're asked to write some sample code that proves your concept, and then that's looked at, reviewed, critiqued. Maybe the proposal gets tweaked, maybe it gets accepted, maybe it doesn't get accepted. But so I guess in that sense, it maybe fits that same philosophy. Chad, you got?
I was just going to say, it would be nice to kind of protect ourselves a little bit in the interest of spending all this time and then perhaps not getting something by asking the leadership team if they would be willing to accept any sort of proposal that they're just not going to change at all. Like, just say, if we came to you with some ideas, even if you don't like them, would you be willing to help us critique and work on them to get something that you do like? Because there's a good chance that we could have the best possible idea in the whole world, and they'll still say they're just.
So I think I took a step towards that on Thursday when I kind of floated the idea for this working group and nobody objected. Thank you. When I floated the idea for that working group and nobody objected, I didn't go to that next step, which was to say, you know, whatever output this group comes up with, will you take it to heart and consider it seriously? So that's a good recommendation, and that ought to be part of the follow-up from this session for me to take back to those groups too. Just a second, Ron. I'm sorry, what's your name? Matt. All right, you had your hand raised for a time too.
Is there something in your mind?
Thank you.
You've gone through the 6 weeks. You mentioned they didn't have enough time. What kind of a commitment do you think would be needed by this group to really come up with an idea that works? And do you think the values of Joomla will be able to be consistent enough among that committee that they need to go in the same direction?
Well, that's a good.
BSD versus Linux.
Yeah, that's a good question. So are you asking what kind of time commitment for individuals, or what kind of time frame would it take to come up with some recommendations, or both, or something else?
You alluded to the fact they didn't have enough time. So if you're going to have
Yeah.
a committee of 15 people, how much time do you just
So I'd say,
like, are you talking like an hour a month? Because that's not going to do anything.
yeah. So here's the way that I think in term.
Trying to clarify a little bit. I think it would be really easy. You said this is our #1 core value, and everything about governance will follow that principle.
Okay.
But if you've got one guy like with BSD, Theodore OBSD, if he says something, it happens, right?
Yeah.
Linus Torvald, the same thing's true, but the two groups have some basic philosophical differences. They're almost diametrically opposed.
Sure.
They both have a dictator. Well,
Yep.
we don't have a dictator,
Yep.
but there's 3 different ways you can do that too.
Yep. So here's the way I think in terms of your question, and give me a little time to sort of try to work my way to where I think maybe you're headed. The terms that I think of it in is that, you know, it might be reasonable to expect in 3 or 4 months that group might have a good set of pretty well thought out and researched recommendations. That'd give them time to look at how other projects are organized, what seems to be good ideas that we could accept, what not, and you know, having a reasonable amount of time and not expecting an unreasonable amount of work on a weekly basis from the members of that group. You know, there might be, well, for example, one of the bullet points on an earlier slide was about partnering with universities and stuff. When I followed up with the university student who was interviewing us and talked to her about an ongoing relationship, you know, she talked about maybe we might do something in the next 6 months. And so we may have to sort of work through this thing in phases, and that's part of the reason why I said to continually improve our project's governance. But I would think that if there was a working group, and part of it would depend on how many people were part of it and how we could divide up the work and how much expertise was already there compared to just people who just said, you know, well, I'm willing to give my time to it. But I think in 3 or 4 months, we could probably come up with another set of recommendations. And maybe a good goal would be, if there's going to be the next leadership meetings at J and Beyond 2013, which I'll assume will be roughly in May or so of 2013, then I think if we had a set of recommendations maybe a month in advance of that, so that there would be enough time for some internal discussions, and hopefully all through this process it's going to be open to the community and taking feedback along the way, so that might be a good timeline to look at trying to see what our next big step forward could be at the next combined leadership meeting. So is that responsive to your question?
Yeah, I mean, the values of, as the group comes and decides what's an improvement.
I like that idea.
The value behind it seems to me, I'm not clear on what it is. Maybe it's because I'm too much of an outsider.
Yeah.
But a number of projects, but I'm still not sure what specific values would drive them to say, well, we need to change like this.
Well, what was the reason they didn't accept the changes that were originally?
Well,
Part of what I was saying before was that in any organization, when you have change, there's resistance. And part of making changes is identifying key figures and key groups and getting them involved and taking ownership. So if it was possible, getting a person, a placeholder for the PLC, a representative from the PLC and one from OSM, so we have kind of 3 people involved in the process of the working group, could be a way of closing the gap between what is actually decided and how it would be taken in. So when we work with larger clients organizations, we'd always want to do work groups and get the employees in and take ownership in the process and stuff, so it has a chance to become a success. If you come from the outside and impose new structures and everything, then it will be very hard to make it a success.
and I think, and I'm sorry, what's your name? Renee? Some of the resistance to change is because people felt like things are just fine the way they are. And I'll just leave it at that. Kendall?
I think a lot of what I've seen, and we talked about this in Joomla Chicago for quite a while actually, it was the idea, and Pascal actually really hit it last night when he said it, it was like, oh, absolutely perfect, was the idea that the community is what's pushing this.
Yeah.
That if the community's not behind it, and not the whole community is not behind it, it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, if the POP, CLP, OSM see that the community says, we're tired of it, we're done, this is what we want, make it happen, it's got to be a groundswell. I mean, it's got to come from the grassroots and get up in there and say, okay, yes, you guys are running this project, but this is for us.
Yeah.
We're the ones helping you make this succeed. We're stepping in when you step away. You know, somebody from the community will step in at some point. If you don't like it, go ahead and walk, because somebody else is ready to take your spot, that is willing to help the project move forward, because we all love Joomla.
But perhaps the first idea would then be to actually focus on the jobs and the citizenship empowering part. Say, well, step 1 is making a 4th column that would have some sort of mandate on behalf of the community with a wider base of support, since it's more democratic and direct processes, and the base of it was that much wider because it came up through the jog, and that would then be, and if that group would form a decision or come with a suggestion, then the backup behind it would be that much greater.
All right.
Citizens a voice.
Yeah.
So we're about out of time. Kendall, that was a great point to end with, and Ronnie, you backing that up too. And I think that, it is important for part of the underlying philosophy of whatever work this working group is going to do is to really engage and get that groundswell, grassroots level of support. So that'd be key too. And I believe we can do that, and I believe that we can be successful with this if we're patient and we're respectful in how we go about it. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm happy to see some names and email addresses on that sheet. Look for a blog in the next few weeks. It'll be announcing the same thing, and maybe if you'll decide in a few weeks you want to join the working group, or maybe you'll share the idea with somebody else and they will. But so thanks again. Appreciate it. Thanks.